me.
I have to worry about you. So why don't we get started, right?
Go
You
ahead.
want to say anything or?
Just, morning, everyone. If everyone could just grab a seat, please. My name's Andrew Booker, so I'll be hosting in this room today. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Ron Gavrin, who's going to talk about strategic human resources management. Ron has a brief biography here, and he's fairly modest, so he asked me just to keep it a little bit quiet. But Ron retired after 30 years in the engineering field. He has both an engineering degree and an MBA. A lot of his experience was spent in the nuclear industry, but he has worked in a variety of other industries as well, and done a number of implementations of both business and maintenance programs. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ron. Thank you very much. Oh, and if anyone has any questions, if you could just save them towards the end, and we do have a mic that will pass around because the session is being recorded. So if you don't speak into the mic, we won't be able to hear the questions. Thanks.
He did well, right?
I had the easy part.
So I'm Ron Gavrin. I'll be talking today about strategic human resources. We had a big, in my company in Ontario, it was a very large utility for electrical power in Ontario. I won't mention which company it is, but they found themselves with an aging workforce. So basically the case study here is about what they did to strategically change that problem. I don't like just giving case studies. I actually like to kind of associate and wrap these case studies with some ideas around asset management, ISO 55000 and what it really means. I believe that we're not taking full advantage of the ISO 55000 because we tend to apply it only to plant and machinery. So I try and find other aspects that we can relate it to, and this was perfect. We'll go through the case study, and then as I go through, I'll try and highlight or kind of suggest some of the ways that we actually treated the human resources aspects as we might be treating plant and equipment, okay? So I'll go back and forth to that. So there's two parts to the presentation. The case study had 5 strategic HR human resources initiatives, and we'll talk about whether or not we actually assess them properly. And I can tell you right now, nobody in the industry, unless you know of it, I'd like to hear about it, does human resources assessed properly. And I'm talking mostly about the benefits. They're notoriously difficult to quantify. So before we start, let me just talk about my view of what ISO 55000 does, and I'll go through this very quickly. This isn't mine, obviously. So this is the point where we're normally looking at. Our traditional view of asset management is, how much does it cost to build something? And here's the expansion that we normally think of with asset management 55,000. And what that is the life cycle of the plant or equipment. We also have another view where it's looked at a very low level, shall we say, a piece of equipment. And in fact, you can look at the organization level. I was often involved in higher level planning. And then sometimes, like in the nuclear industry, we actually look across the entire industry because we need cooperation among all the nuclear plants in North America and sometimes the world. And down here is what I'm going to focus on. Plant and equipment is what you're used to. Here's the people. That's what we're going to concentrate on today. I want you to just notice that information, knowledge, companies have specific knowledge, and their reputation are all huge aspects of assets. And reputation in business schools in the last 10 years has just taken off. okay, as a big, big topic. But we will talk today about people and how they are an asset. I know I probably don't have to say, because companies all say human resources, they're our most important aspect, and then they proceed to lay everyone off. Okay, they are not, unless they see the human resources as those assets. So this case study, there we go. So this is the kind of thing I'll be showing as we go through. If you've taken the MMP 3, I believe, which is human resources, you'll know that this life cycle is what they describe as the life cycle of human resources. So you'll see that beside it in red, I've put in what the physical plant would be that kind of relates to that. So here we have engagement, hiring. What we call that when we have plant and equipment is you acquire it, it's acquisition. Okay, you construct or bring in. The induction and training is commissioning. You're all familiar with that term? Okay, you bring in equipment and you have to test it out. So we call that commissioning. And day-to-day employment management is operations and maintenance. That's a big part of it. And they say managing relationships with unions, I could only think of suppliers, among others. Sorry. And finally, performance management is what we do with equipment. If we're doing things right, we want to monitor equipment and groups of equipment, systems, to make sure it's operating well, and so we can predict what's going to happen in the future. And finally, the termination aspect, which is either retirement or firing or downsizing, and that's disposal of equipment. By the way, that can be huge in the nuclear industry. It probably costs more and takes more effort than the actual running and purchasing of the nuclear setup. It's really years. So that's just one aspect of how human resources could be treated more as equipment. Now, we can't take that to an extreme. People are different than equipment, but just that idea of a life cycle. So let me go into the case study background. We were a large regulated electrical utility. At one time, we were 40,000 and got split out, and we had over 11,000 staff that included nuclear, coal plants, and hydroelectric. The company was very advanced. Companies from Scandinavia and the Middle East and Europe were coming to see, after World War II, how we managed multiple generation sources. Okay. And then around that time, all kinds of changes started to happen. We underwent deregulation. The government started to privatize us, and the functions were split off. So the safety aspect was split off, and it became a very turbulent time. Right at that time, our HR people decided or realized that half to 2/3 of certain staff functions were going to disappear over the next several years because they were all coming into retirement. That's all our engineers and at least half of the trades, which was very critical, and half of operations. By the way, in nuclear, if you don't have the complement of certified operators, you shut the plant down on a day-to-day basis, on a shift-to-shift basis. That doesn't happen because we have to make sure that we have it. But this was an eye-opener. I don't know why, because for 10 years we hadn't hired. So what action to take? And I just want to say that whatever I'm describing here didn't happen in a really clearly defined way. It was a bunch of stuff that was happening all over a period of years. So I don't want you to think that somebody actually plotted it out. And I think that's how strategy actually happens. It happens piecemeal over time. Anyway, that's a little bit on that. So here's human resources is a strategic asset. And I wanted you to see this, you'll probably recognize that as the path to failure for equipment. You know, how do you predict it? We did exactly that. A little not so clean. It was a little fuzzier, but it was really looking at how long did we have before we had to do something about replacing literally hundreds of key staff. Okay, so they actually took, of course, all our human resources people really were engineers as well. It's kind of mixed in with the culture. So they took this approach and they said, what's happening to us? And they had a few initiatives, and here they are. Rejuvenation hiring, like get younger people in. Training, we'll talk about that. Operating procedures, you wouldn't think that that has anything to do, but it did, and I'll tell you how. Availability of specific types of skills, and we'll talk about that as well. And finally, they got into mentoring programs. I'm very interested in mentoring and the topic. And mentoring programs indicate that a company means what it says when they say humans are our number one asset. It means they're investing time in just bringing people along and trying to make sure they stay in the company. So let's take a look at the first initiative. Staff was aging because hiring had stopped over a decade. Why, you might ask? Because it was too expensive. We couldn't afford it, so we stopped hiring. Just by the way, our company was one of the biggest hirers of graduate engineers in Ontario, certainly. We would take 50 to 100 graduates every year, and they counted on it. It's like, you know, Bell Telephone would go in and hire all the electrical engineers out of McGill or U of T or whatever. There was a bit of political influence because a government had come in that wasn't pro-nuclear, nuclear generation. And so what they did was say, let's hold up. Maybe we don't need the nuclear. And while they held us up to make decisions, a lot of this was falling by the wayside. So they figured after 10 years of this, let's resume hiring. Well, you don't just stop a system and then start it up again. It doesn't work that well. So what happened was we looked to younger professional managers, you know, MBAs, not many, but that was one of the aspects, and graduate engineers. We wanted a lot of top graduate engineers, and we wanted the trades, young people to come into the trades. By the way, our average age was, I think at the time was 50. That's the average. So there was nobody there under 40. They used to say, if you go into the elevator and you see someone doesn't have gray hair, it's because they're visiting their parents. That was really how extreme it had become. So we had to go out and do this. Let me tell you about the engineering part. So we went and hired a few engineers. You know, we started out, it was very tenuous. After 2 or 3 years, we got a little more, But when I say hiring, it was like a handful. So they'd come to a big station, they sit in the lunchroom, and there was this, you know, all the tables are all over, and they'd gather together around 1 or 2 tables, and they'd look at all their grandparents sitting around them, okay? And when we offered packages to the grandparents, none of the grandparents took them. You know what I mean, the older staff. And they all took it, and we were shocked. We're losing all the new people that came in. And they said, you know, we're alone here. We can go out. You're offering us money if we leave. You know, we'll go and travel in Europe, and we'll come back and we'll get any job we want. And these were the last people we wanted to lose. So we said, okay, this is what we're going to do. And we started a huge hiring program. We got oriented. The managers had to pay attention to it. And we went on what we call speed dating or speed hiring, where you'd have a big room and every manager would interview 3 or 4 people in a cohort. So they spent all day just going around and visiting, and that way we could average out the scores for the people. Okay, so that's what happened, and we started to hire more and more. And I can tell you that pretty soon there was an abundance of young engineers, at least. Trades was another matter, but we'll talk a little more about that, although it did improve. So the consideration here is from a technical, from a assessment point of view, how many do you hire? And the second part, which is very important, is what overlap period do you use? 1 year, 2 years, nothing, you know? And believe me, there was discussion about that. There were people that said we can't afford overlap. And other people said you can't afford not to have the overlap because that training is how you get people in that can do the job. I'm going to show you, this is my bad chart. These are by years going down. These are, the blue are the people that are there, and maybe as they drop off, those are the people retiring. And this is the hiring every year, and you bring them in. I've shown something that shows a fair bit of overlap. Because first of all, we didn't know when our people were going to leave, because they don't have to take retirement when it's available. And the second part is we didn't know what quality of people we were getting in. You know, how difficult would it be to absorb them and deal with them? And so that's basically what happened. What I put this up for is that basically here, there's a lump here, and then it falls down. If you've been involved in planning new equipment or new facilities, that's exactly the pattern you have. There's an investment up front, and then you hope, you expect that it will catch up as you go through. Okay, I'm just showing again, these are a resource, treat them as a resource. The next one was training initiatives. Now, there's 3 parts to training. The orientation is when they come in. That was very important to us with the new people. Training can be on the job, and in our on-the-job training, there was also training involved as they developed. But then there's development training, which is training those people for the next job they're going to do. So if we could train them for the next job they had to do, we had a whole bunch of people that could really move up nicely. We also had what I think somebody described as the second largest training program in Ontario, including U of T, University of Toronto. Okay, that's huge. So it was really big. And what happened was a university was started up in our neighborhood, which was east of Toronto, Ontario Tech at the time. And Ontario Hydro, the nuclear people, were put over into that, and we started a nuclear program. Right beside us was General Motors. And they also have a huge training program. And they also did the same thing. They started up a faculty for automotive. And so that was all spun off. The cohorts that came in for orientation, we learned that you don't really want, you know, the people that are retiring to be the kind of the mentors during orientation, because they can't identify. So what we did was they took people that had been hired 2 years before. You know, they were close to their age, and they came in and they explained to them what to expect, and they kind of guided them through the process to make them feel good. Now, I can only say with training that ISO requires qualified staff to do the work, right? So the training is just part of the asset management. If we didn't have trained people to do the work, we weren't complying with ISO 55000. My question, though, is, and this is the part that's very difficult in HR, as it is in quality programs, how do you figure the benefits? How do you quantify the benefits of some of this? I mean, it can be done, but we don't normally look at that. And please tell me if you work with companies that quantify this kind of thing. Okay, next one was procedures. Nuclear is a very regulated industry, and we had procedures. The Canadians relied mostly on having highly trained operators and maintenance people. They were there for decades, they learned the job, but over time, the procedures had degraded. We didn't care because all our people knew their stuff. And then the Americans came in to do peer reviews. The American system grew out of the nuclear navy. And if you've heard what that was like, it was very, very detailed. And they said, are you crazy? You can't do that. So we put in a big effort, nothing to do with training our people. It was all because we had to adhere and have updated procedures. And as a result of that, some years later, when the new people came in, they could follow those procedures, and we didn't have to explain that everything was, was really not right. It really had been upgraded, and by chance, we had a good system for them. The benefit from this was procedural adherence, but the HR benefit is for the training. We were lucky of the timing. Okay, let's talk about some skills availability. You do need some specialized skills. Trades are impossible to get. I don't know why everyone isn't pushing their kids into trades. Honest to God, they're going to be making a lot more money in trades in a decade or two from now. But the schools don't encourage that. And the parents don't, the families don't. Especially in Toronto, if they're immigrant parents, they're not thinking about the trades. They're saying, oh, you have to go to university and get your PhD and all that. So we don't have new trades coming in, and this is a long-term issue. So we have people, not just our company, but the government and other companies like GM that went to the schools, to the high schools, to encourage people to go into the trades, to make it seem like a nice destination, which it was. When people talk about women in non-traditional roles, this is from some years ago, it's just words maybe, but it certainly wasn't for us, because if we could get women to go into the trades, that's 50% of the population. They don't really want to. So they don't feel that it's a space for them, but we wanted to encourage them to do so. Anything we could do to get people into these skills that we were looking for. And there was also the immigration focus. If we can't get them here, let's go outside and get them in. Well, if you get people from the outside, they come in and they have to be reoriented to the way we do things. By the way, we also had some real specialists that we were looking for, and we went to the universities and said, this is what we need, and they were enthusiastic. So one of them was risk PhDs, doctors in risk, and the other one was water hammer, piping experts that knew water hammer. We couldn't get enough of these at a time. Okay. So these are all long-term initiatives. They're hard to measure the performance results. Like, are we getting more people in? Because it's a decade later, if you're going to the high schools, that you'll see these people. And the costs were really minimal at the time. It was just our people talking. And we really have to change societal beliefs that university is the preference. It's the only choice. It's not. Okay. Sorry. Sorry, it's the computer jamming up. And finally, the fifth one is mentoring. So I'll talk about this a little bit too much maybe, but I won't go over, don't worry. So mentoring started, it's the way we've learned throughout history. It's only recently that universities have come along and that we've learned through the scientific method. But the history is really that you would learn from older people as as the generations pass through. By the way, the term mentoring, is anyone classically trained, classical literature? Okay. Ulysses, the Odyssey by Homer. When Ulysses went off to war, the Trojan War, he left behind a guy to look after his son. And that man's name was Mentor, Greek name. And that's what mentoring comes from. So since the 80s, academic and practitioners are really interested in it. The places that they really are interested is largely where human resources are very valuable to them. Like in Silicon Valley, you know what they're paying people. And that's because the quality of the people they bring in determines the success of the business. Okay. And so they looked at mentoring and how it worked. And you don't need to know this, but Dr. Cram was like the original, wrote about mentoring. There's 3 objectives: career, role model, and psychosocial. But the point I want to make is that they came out with something called Mentoring Function Questionnaire, MFQ9, because there were 9 questions, and it was a way of ranking or quantifying the results of mentoring. People would answer, and they would tell you how well it worked. Now, it's very biased if you only do one, but if you have lots of people doing it, they can rank mentoring programs. So there's a way to quantify benefits. And I'm going to suggest that if we look to the academic world, they have ways of quantifying other things. It's very positive if it's done well. All kinds of bad, negative things happen when you pick a certain group to be mentored and everyone looks at them and saying, what's so special about them? Okay. I can tell you that a lot of mentoring was done with women in non-traditional roles, and the men would all grumble. And it was also, especially in the States, it was done with racial classes and that sort of thing. And again, there was grumbling, and there was a lot of, not a lot, but there was some lack of acceptance by the population as a whole. So those are things you have to watch out for. And the mentors also usually had a power differential to the people they were mentoring. And, when that happens, things sometimes go askew. So you have to be worried about who these mentors are, that they've got a good outlook. So basically, the humans are assets. We've just discussed that. I heard from one HR manager who said, the hiring of one person is $1 million decision. And I said, what? And this was in the 90s. And that's true because it's over their life. And if you get the wrong person in, the correction measures you have to put in place these days is definitely $1 million or more. So it's easier to quantify the costs in HR programs. We kind of know how to do that, but the benefits are notoriously difficult. Can be done, but you have to have a whole industry looking at it, and the way we used to look at a physical plant. The HR function isn't usually interested, traditionally, in quantifiable numbers. So you have to get people from the outside to help them along. The HR function are more, people, or they should be, and legal people, but the number side has to come from what I call cost engineers. Okay, engineers who can also do costing and benefit costs. They do it for equipment, do it for the programs. So here are conclusions. People are an asset. It proposes techniques for physical plant assets. It does propose techniques also for humans. I mean, they don't separate that. And we as a group, asset management, that's the AMP courses, have to understand that it's not just plant and equipment. Everyone talks about holistic asset management. This is some part that most of us are missing. Okay. Cost engineers are well to look after it. And I think the case study and all my experience has demonstrated that HR decisions are not come by in a logical, quantified way. Strategy implementation is often piecemeal. I don't believe that organizations are smart enough or organized enough to think through, 5 or 6 of these initiatives, like that procedural thing. Who would have believed that that would lead to better training? It was done because it was a requirement. And strategic items take a long time to implement. So again, organizations, at least in North America, aren't prone to take on long-term activities. In Japan, they're better at it, with the quality stuff. We're learning how to do that, but I think we always want results really quickly. And change management is very difficult to put in place. Okay. So that's my experience that I'm sharing with you of strategic human resources. Are there any questions? And by the way, is there anybody, I wish there would be, who can say, in our company, we actually do assess hiring, human resources changes with numbers? And yes? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
So I was part of an audit a couple of years ago, and the finding in the audit, the client had asked me to come and help assist. And my background is asset management and not thinking of humans as the asset at that time.
Yeah.
And the findings were that, their procedures, the employee participation and training. And we had an asset management software, and they said, was there anything, that you recommend, Angela, to help us with the employees? And I was like, well, we're an asset management software. I don't know how I'm going to incorporate that into the software. It wasn't something we had done before.
Yes.
So I went home and I thought about it. And the next day I called them and I was like, I think we can restructure the software for it to have its own basically unit, but for employees. And we put the employees in the software, and the employees even had a functional location for their actual position. So if it was an asset manager, that was the functional location, and then the actual asset was the individual in that position. And then we put KPIs because they had never followed through with their audits before. And they never, and that was a finding.
Yes,
they had
absolutely.
2 other audits and they never followed through with the KPI. So we created KPIs and we created training within there. And then we started following the procedures and who was responsible for all of these things within the asset management software. And that was exactly how I started thinking about it. These are the most important assets out here that we have, which is your employees. And there's a hierarchy. If the employees are not trained on the procedures, the workflows, then the assets are not going to be managed properly.
And may I ask you, where do you work, or what kind of?
So this was in Texas, actually.
Okay.
So I work for the office here with Antea and Montreal, and also in Texas.
And what kind of industry was it?
So this was oil and gas.
Oil and gas.
Yes.
Excellent. By the way, oil and gas and utilities are usually at the cutting edge of things. Why? Because they have tons of money. And they can, no, seriously, that's how it works. They can afford it. So they do all kinds of interesting things. Thank you very much.
Hi, Ron. Wayne Widener
Hi,
from
Wayne.
Prince Rupert Port Authority. 2 years ago, I asked a question on a professional social media outlet, a question of, do you believe that people or employees are assets? And I got an eclectic answer to that. And one person who I actually worked side by side with at an aluminum smelter in the region took offense to being called an asset. How do we square up and help the people in our organizations. Understand that you are asset. You're very important. You're the most important asset in the organization, and that you should not be offended by this statement.
Yes. You'll notice that when I said, people are an asset like a piece of machinery, that I said you have to take that just as a way of thinking. You can't take that too far, obviously, because we are different than pumps and motors and stuff. But there is a life cycle. And that's a very interesting question. This is education. People have to understand assets are positive things. It's not negative. They say you're an asset. If you're in the accounting profession, you don't want to be the liability, so you're an asset. Any others? Yes.
I think continuous education as well amongst the people, the company, the organization. I think they need to continuously pass that information across so everyone understands the role they play in
Yes.
every organization. We all plug into different areas
Yes.
in the organization. So whatever we do that brings value to that organization, it means we are performing a function. And that's an asset.
Yes.
And we all have life cycles across that organization as well. The years that we spend, the time that we want to stay in those organizations. So it's very important. Yeah, we understand that people cannot be happy. You can't equip, an equipment to a human being,
Yes.
but because of that role, that function we play in that organization, that makes us an asset.
Absolutely.
And I just want to ask a follow-up question, if you don't mind. Which
Oh.
system or software did you use? Okay.
They were our only client that we did this with. Yeah, so it was our only client, but it actually worked, and they're still utilizing it. So
And it's out of Canada, or is it? out of the
so the
You'd like
software
to sell a little bit.
software is based out of Italy. So it's
Oh.
new to North America, fairly new. We brought it over here about 5 years ago, but it's been around for 35 years. So,
Okay, so I have a suggestion. We should all go to Italy to check it out.
that was a selling point for me as well.
Yes? Oh,
Hi, Ron. Zoe here. So I actually went through the Unini program at U of T.
Unini?
Unini, yeah.
Yes, I know it well.
Yeah. So one of the things
Just
that
by the way, that's the university nuclear,
Network for Nuclear Excellence.
it's okay.
Yeah. So one of the things that I found really impressive about that program was that we were connected in with folk on your side who had just intense levels of technical knowledge, but we didn't get enough of them.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I'm wondering, how have you managed to take that deep level of technical excellence that was embedded in their brains and actually capture that for the next generation if there was such a big gap?
Well, Unini itself was where you would send, we would send our own younger engineers and staff who were really promising, and they would take a master's, but with other nuclear experts, okay, and they would take courses together. So we were not only connecting, in our own plant, we were connecting across the industry with the Bruce and various other groups as well, academia and so on. I happen to be the Darlington representative for Unini with Waterloo. So I know a little bit about it. And I was so enthused with this program. I wanted to take it. And they said, no, we need people that are younger. So I'm interested to hear what your experiences were. Yes.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm a Unini grad.
Oh, you are?
Yeah. Yeah.
And where were you located when you went to Unini?
Bruce.
You were at the Bruce?
Yeah. And
Okay.
I can tell you, I really.
I'm always scared when people come up after and say, I worked there, and it wasn't like that at all. So go ahead, please.
No, I thoroughly enjoyed the program.
It was a good amalgamation of us, folks from Pickering, Darlington, obviously, and the regulator, CNSC. We were able to kind of correlate, build strong leads, contacts into the whole program. And I wish it was, there's not a lot of enthusiasm because it takes a lot of work with your own work, right? But when I go back to your slides up there,
Yes.
now I'm in maintenance side of the house. I look into maintenance contract side. We started a program called a rework program, and the underlying intent was to find out really what kind of rework are we and what is the business impact getting.
Yes.
And when we started asking some tough questions about
Yeah.
it, I mean, people shy away from reporting as rework. But the whole idea is it's lack of knowledge, lack of information, lack of understanding, and it causes a significant asset failure in future. So
Yeah. Good.
and the other thing we can also see is, there is a significant knowledge base. People doesn't want to stick in the role for long compared to when we joined in the industry a while ago. Or at those times, the engineering folks would be in their role for a longer time but now you don't see that.
And I might add to that, imagine now the trades. Some goes into trades and they're doing really well, and then they get a family and, they need the money because the pay is really good, at least in nuclear. But then they say, well, we want you at home nights, not always going on shift work and everything. When somebody's 50 or older, they want to spend time at home. They don't want to be subject to overtime at the beck and call of somebody, some outage or some turnaround. So they want to go into something that's more stable as a lifestyle. And that's where it's hard to keep the really top tradespeople in place. We have to be innovative about this stuff. The industry has to be. Yeah.
No, thank you.
Thank you. You're not at the Bruce now, are you? Or are you still there? Oh, excellent. Okay.
I think we have time for one more question.
Ooh.
Okay, wow, lots of great questions and a great presentation. So thank you very much. And thanks for everyone for attending.
Thank you.